Ketchup. Thanks, ketchup. Lyda. So before you start, Wayne, let me have that. Okay, now what we're going to do, the ones that's testing tonight, raise your hands. All right, so as soon as this is over, we're going to go ahead and test. George, I think, where'd George go? All right, I think he's taking some to do a restaurant test. So that's not going to be us, okay? That's them. So as soon as this is through, we're going to do that and see how it all turns out. But I'm glad y'all came. And I'm going to turn it over to Wayne and let him do his thing. It's a very interesting ADA laws, but you got to realize that, and he'll tell you that a guide dog is different than what we got. But here you go, Wayne. How about it?
Hey Jerry, turn up just a little bit, would you? Turn it right off.
Second knob.
Can you hear me better now?
It's got more than 2 moving parts, that's the problem.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of Veterans Canine Solutions. My name is Wayne Scase, and let me give you a little bit of my history. I've been visually impaired since I was a toddler. I've been a guide dog owner for 17 years. I was matched to my first leader dog back in May of 2000. Well, fast forward to October 2010, and I became an owner trainer. I've been an owner trainer for 7 years, and over the 17 years, I've had to learn quite a lot about ADA and ACAA and the FHA. I know, alphabet soup. Now, but before I get into ADA and access denial and stuff like that, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the service dog movement in the United States and the world itself. First, though, okay, sorry. I was always taught not to eat the mic.
Yeah,
So,
I was trying to tell him out here, but he didn't say anything. Go ahead, Wayne.
you're funny, Jerry. All right, so, for the veterans among us, at some point in your life, you swore a solemn oath to uphold and defend the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to which you are still bound. It is because of your service that I'm able to stand here and speak to you, because we have freedom of speech. We also have the freedom to declare our independence. Now, I got a question for you. How many days a year do you celebrate independence?
Every day.
Darn it! I was going to say I'd celebrate it 2 days a year. Today, tomorrow. But a case could be made that November 5th should be the Independence Day for service dog owners, or at least for guide dog owners. Here's why I say that. In 1927, the Saturday Evening Post published a seminal article written by Dorothy Harrison Eustace. Now, Miss Eustace, she was an American philanthropist living over in Switzerland in a little place called Vevey, running an experimental German Shepherd breeding program called Fortunate Fields. Well, she wrote this article about her observations about a school in Potsdam, Germany. That school was teaching German Shepherd dogs to guide blinded German veterans. She wrote about it, and the Saturday Evening Post published that article November 5th, 1927, and that article was read to a young boy from Nashville, Tennessee, named Morris Frank. Now, he'd been blind for a while, trying to sell insurance, and he was having a deuce of a time because the people he was hiring to lead him around weren't doing the job right. And he told her, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it memorized. Basically, he told her, Miss Eustace, you give me a guide dog, and I'll bring it back to the U.S., and I will move heaven and earth to spread the word about guide dogs in the U.S. Well, he did, and she did. Now, next thing I'm going to tell you may upset you a little bit, but it was a blessing in disguise. And I'll explain about that after I get through there. So, Miss Eustace approached the Germans in Potsdam and said, hey, I want to buy a guide dog for got in America. And they said, get lost. Well, that was a blessing in disguise because Miss Eustace sent her head trainer, a guy named Jack Humphreys. Now, Mr. Humphreys, he's probably most famous, besides being the head trainer, the first head trainer of the Seeing Eye, as the man that taught a camel to walk backwards 17 steps. Well, anyway, they taught him some stuff, but they didn't teach him everything. And he had to sit down and think, analyze, improvise, and come up with solutions to gaps that he saw when he was training that German Shepherd for Morris Frank. So this gets done in June of 1928. Mr. Frank goes to Switzerland. He's matched with a little German Shepherd female named Kiss. Well, we don't know where's Kiss to this day because he quickly changed her name to Buddy. And he brought her back to the United States, to Nashville, and he was going all over God's creation, showing his dog off what she could do. And on January 29th, 1929, the Seeing Eye was formed by Miss Eustace and Morris Frank in Nashville, Tennessee. Well, they didn't stay in Nashville very long. In 1931, they moved lock, stock, and barrel to where they're at right now, Morristown, New Jersey. And they reincorporated. Now, I just want to clarify something a little bit. Just a little trivia. The dog I have beside me does the same thing as a Seeing Eye dog, but he's not a Seeing Eye dog because he did not graduate from the Seeing Eye Dog School in Morristown, New Jersey, because they trademarked it. It's like Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola. You don't want to call one the other. So, now, I've been teasing Jerry, every guide dog is a service animal, but not all service animals are guide dogs. So it's more of an umbrella term. Well, sorry, I got off track, sorry. When Mr. Frank picked up that harness handle and the leash of Buddy in 1928, now I don't know if any of the veterans here went and watched that video that Grace sent out to ask you guys to watch last night about Morris Frank in his own words. I'm going to kind of paraphrase. Basically, he said when he picked up that leash and harness handle, he was declaring his independence again. I do that every day, every time I pick up Harley's leash and harness handle. I'm saying to you, every day you pick up your dog's leash, you too are renewing your independence, your declaration of independence. Now, from 1928, sorry, a little more history. Sorry, don't mean to bore you. Out of that initial dog trained in Fortunate Fields, not only did they form the Seeing Eye here in the United States, they formed the Guide Dog for the Blind Association in Britain because of quarantine laws back then. They couldn't bring dogs in because of that 6-month quarantine. They also had a school for a while in Vevey to train other European blind folks. Now, funny little story there. Frenchman went there, got a guide dog, went home. Things are going along great. Next thing you know, that dog shows up in Vevey on the train. And they're kind of scratching their heads saying, what the heck's going on? Well, they contacted the Frenchman, and he says, oh my God, I didn't know where she went. The gentleman's wife was jealous of the dog and sent her back. Now, to counterbalance that, there's a story about a young gentleman in the United States. Him and his mom didn't have much. But she had this beautiful silver bowl that she got as a wedding present. She never figured out what to do with it. She just sat there, polished it, looked at it. It was pretty. Well, when he got his Seeing Eye dog, brought her home, and the mother saw what this dog was doing in giving her son his independence back, she found a use for that silver bowl to water the dog. I'd say that's pretty darn sweet. Now, from 1928 till 1975, the only service animals in the United States were guide dogs. Now, there are schools that have come and gone. Two of the oldest right now, the Seeing Eye, of course, they're still around, and leader dogs, where I got my first 3 guide dogs. Now, in 1975, a young lady named Bonnie Bergen was traveling in Asia, and she had the brainstorm of, why not train dogs to help people disabled people besides the blind? That's how come you're here today. That brainchild of that young lady. Now, she started a Bergen University of Canine Study, I believe, out in California. She was also one of the founders of Canine Companions for Independence, who has an ugly stepchild called Assistance Dogs International. Bad mojo. Ain't going to talk about them much more. Anyway, that's pretty much the history of it. Because that, of course, there was some resistance by the guide dog trainers at the time in 1975, because it felt a little threatened. Don't blame them. Don't like what they did, but guess what? They persevered, and now there are other organizations. CCI, Paws for the Cause, Veterans Canine Solutions. Now, let's talk about access denial and the laws that pertain to the disabled. 27 years ago, a law was signed by President George Bush, the first one, called the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, a service animal is defined as a dog, and got to make sure it's a domestic one, can't be any mix of any wild species, it's in there, that is individually trained in work or task, and it can be only one. That's the lower limit. To mitigate a disabled person's disability. Now, when one of us that has a service animal goes into a place of public accommodation, the place of public accommodation can ask us 2 questions. 1, is that a service dog? And my answer will be, yeah, he's a service dog. He doesn't have to wear a vest. He doesn't have to wear anything identifying him as a service animal. They have to go on my say-so. But, we'll get to what more important stuff in just a minute. Now, the second question that they can ask is, if the dog's purpose is not readily visibly apparent, they can ask you question number 2, which is, what work or task has that dog been trained to mitigate your disability? Now, in Harley's case, this is Harley. Hey, sit. Walk. That's it. Harley is an American White Shepherd, Labrador mix. We think he's a rescue, so we don't know for sure. Whatever he is, he's all awesome. He's 7 years old. He's been keeping me alive for 6 years now. Anyway, his tasks are, at least some of it, his task is, and these are components of that task called guiding. He stops for curbs, he signals obstacles and overhead obstacles, changes in terrain, stuff like that, and most importantly, he uses intelligent disobedience to keep us safe. An example of that would be, say we're at a street crossing, and this is the easiest one to talk about. We're at a street crossing, and I ask him, hey, yes, Harley, forward. I'm going to say Juno, actually, so I don't want him starting to step out on me. Juno, forward. That is a request. It's not a command. And he uses his training and his intelligence to decide whether or not it's safe to go or not. So if I ask him, Harley, forward, and he doesn't move, I'm not going to correct him. Because there might be a car coming. I don't want to become road pizza. Thank you very much. Now, for the veterans here, when it comes time, and there's 2 kinds of service dog owners. Those that have had access denials and those that are going to have access denials. Okay? Deal with it. Sorry, don't mean to sound flip. It is something you will have to deal with. So to prepare yourself ahead of time. Sit down and write down what tasks your dog does in such a way that it does not indicate to the general public what your disability is. Okay? The reason I say this is, although a gatekeeper at a public place of public accommodation can ask you those two questions, they cannot ask you to provide ID for the dog. That's an illegal act. They cannot ask you to provide proof of training. They cannot ask you to demonstrate your dog's tasks, which for someone that is a diabetic, that's, life endangering. So, yeah, not going to happen. Nor can they ask what your disability is. Okay? Now, it's pretty obvious what my disability is, because it just is. Although, ironically, being blind is not an invisible disability. Pondered that one many a time. Now, I heard about an incident in Harlem where the chief of police accosted one of the veterans, and he made an illegal request of that veteran. He asked for the dog's certification. Now, the dog is a service dog. That's an illegal request. Now, from what I hear, that the veteran did follow the training that Jerry has given you. Good job. But now Jerry is, and VK9S is following up with the Harlem Police Department. Jerry, come on up. We're going to do a little role play. You're going to be a business owner. And you're going to make that illegal.
Okay. I got you.
All right?
Well, he's illegal to start with.
Don't tell nobody. I can't do that.
We don't want him deported.
All right, go ahead.
All right.
Oh, excuse me. Is that the service guy?
Yes, he is.
I will see a vest on it.
You don't need to see one. It's not required by law.
Well, come in my place. Let me see some documentation.
That, again, is a legal request. You can ask me for two questions. What is he a service dog, and what tasks he performs? Yes, he's a service dog.
Well, he don't look like one to me. You're going to have to take him out.
I don't think,
serve.
sir, I'd like to speak to the owner.
All right, let's get him. Hold on a minute. Yes, sir. What can I do for you?
Your employee was denying my access with my service animal.
Which, well, he knows better than that. Or if he don't, he will when he leaves here. Because I'll have a talk with him. That is something we can't do.
He did not ask me the two legal questions. Or he asked me one of the legal questions, and then he asked a legal question and asking for my dog's documentation.
I'll take care of that, and I'll make sure that. Can I have you seated? And
Sure. Let's go eat.
we appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I want a free meal.
I'm not going to push it.
But Jerry, I would.
So that's a little bit of how I would handle it. Now, if Jerry, if during the scenario the owner had continued to refuse me access, and state laws backed me up, because not all states are equal, not all state laws are equal, I would have asked to have the police called, and I would have filed a police report, and then followed it up with the Human Rights Commission of the state. Now, that's for a service dog that has completed training. So that's kind of a misnomer, because our service dogs never stop training. You will always be training your service dog, extending, maintaining that training. However, for sake of argument, the service dog, well, here's another myth I want to bust. Your dogs don't have any rights. You, the human, do, because this is a civil law. So, the way the ADA is written, it is to grant the greatest amount of protection to the greatest amount of people. And I lost my train of thought. Darn it. Thank you. But the ADA is silent about the training of service animals. So because the ADA is silent, it's left up to individual states on how that is handled. For example, my understanding is here in Georgia, for a service animal trainer to be accompanied by a service animal in training in public, they have to be an agent of a service animal program. In Illinois, it's not that way. In Illinois, where I'm from, I just have to say that he's a service animal in training. I'm training him. So there's the variance there. There are some states, and there, so therefore Illinois does allow owner training. Georgia kind of does, kind of doesn't. There are some states, like Washington State, that flat out don't. And now, let's talk a little bit about certifications and registries for service animals. Don't do it. They are scams because they are used by non-disabled folks that just have their pets, so they want to take foo-foo everywhere. Well, guess what? They're lying, and they're going to be the first people that want to flip out that ID card saying, "This is my certified service dog." Guess what? Ain't no such thing. Now, here in Georgia, for service animal in training, especially the veterans here, you do carry a card from VK9S, and you're required to show it. But once your dog completes training and passes that service animal test through VK9S, you don't need it anymore. Okay? And the reason I'm kind of adamant about this is, say I go into a place and I start having a hassle about getting in, and I whip out my, like for example, when I was a graduate, when I was working with a guide dog from Leader Dogs from Leader Dogs for the Blind, I had an ID card from them. So I flip that out, say, hey, yeah, here's my ID. But say, my friend Buddy, who has an owner training guide dog, comes in behind me. He doesn't have an ID. He gets hassled, maybe denied access, or maybe he fights through and gets the access, but leaves a bad taste in his mouth. You never know who's coming behind you. We are all ambassadors for the service animal movement in the world. Not just the United States, the world itself. Okay? So our behavior does not just affect us. It also affects anybody coming behind us. Somebody we may know, somebody we may not know. Now, I had a question from my desk clerk at the hotel this afternoon about emotional support animals. I said, well, there are emotional support animals, but they're not service animals. What's the difference? I said, well, for example, VK9S trains dogs for psychiatric service work, and the key word here is trains. Emotional support animals don't need any training. Yet under the ACAA and the FHA, one for flying, one for housing, the owner of an ESA for housing can request a reasonable accommodation to have their ESA with them in non-pet friendly housing, and they can take them on an airplane to fly. Now, sadly, current regulations require that disabled folks that have a psychiatric service dog must present a note from their doctor that they need the psychiatric, their psychiatric service dog with them. But again, very importantly, it cannot disclose what that person's disability is. That would be a violation of HIPAA. and it also has to be less than a year old when you fly. Okay. Hey Jerry, I've covered most of the three parts of the agenda. What was the third one? Do you remember? Oh, good Lord.
Somebody's going to have to take me to where I live and see, but I can't remember what's that.
What happened? Your hair turned blonde or something? No, I'm just kidding. Well, I'm going to have to close here because I've lost my train of thought and I can't remember what else I wanted to talk about. However, the reason I'm here, and I want to explain how I got where I'm here today. A few years ago, I was signed up for an email newsletter from a holistic vet in Chicago named Dr. Karen Becker. She posted an issue of that newsletter that listed organizations that train service dogs for veterans. And Veterans Canine Solutions caught my eye because Jerry flat out said, or however the doctor found out, that they rescue dogs from shelters and then save 2 lives at once by training the veteran to train your own service dogs. So I reached out to him, we became friends, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now I'm going to close with that, but I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to questions. Okay? Any questions?
Say it loud so I hear you.
So what if you said that the letter of recommendation from your doctor has to be less than a year old life? What do we do if we're
That's
at-
emotional support animal.
And psychiatric, Jerry.
Pardon me?
Psychiatric and emotional support.
Okay, yeah, he's right. Because it's got to be less than a year old. So you just go back to your doctor and get you another.
Do we just call you? 'Cause I mean, what if
No.
No, you got to go to your
No.
doctor.
It has to come from your doctor.
Most airlines, if you have the ID that comes from Veteran Canine Solutions, if you have one of 3 forms of ID, a vest, a printed ID from the training organization, or there's one other thing, I can't remember what it is, they'll honor it without having that note. You just got to call them in advance
They will honor
and
it.
ask them what they require.
Now, the reason I say it, unfortunately, they require that note is because I don't have to have one. But because of the abuse of people fraudulently misrepresenting, I'm not going to say fake, service animal. You'll never hear me say that again. Because someone is fraudulently claiming a disability they don't have to claim rights and privileges that don't belong to them.
Kind of like stolen valor. We like that, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beat the crap out of them.
So that, in fact, I'm working with a task force in Illinois to help draft a new law or a new bill to try to cut down on fraudulent misrepresentation. It's not something we want to do. We've got good laws in Illinois, but one of our representatives got a wild hair up her, and has twice introduced the same darn bill that abrogates the ADA, violates civil rights. I mean, for crud's sake, she wanted, let's see, completes all obedience requests 90% on the first ask, in the home and in public.
We got any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
prescriptions are tied? Only prescriptions from your doctor that provides
Yes. She asked would a prescription suffice instead of the letter, as long as it's under a year old, right?
It has to be on the doctor's letterhead and have their signature on it. So there's really no such a thing as a prescription for a service animal. It would have to be a note stating that something to the effect that a service dog would improve your quality of life.
What is the
At least
service-
that's my understanding.
Well, that could be true, but anytime you're prescribed a service animal, it's not to hinder the quality of life, it's to make it better. So in my point of view, that would be fine.
That's why you were saying.
What else? Anybody questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, where does the animal ride? Because normally on an airplane, they ride in the undercarriage. Do
Not
they
a service
ride
animal.
with you? Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Service animals ride inside.
I
So-
can touch on that. I just did that. I just flew from Augusta to Baltimore and back, and I took her and she flew in the seat right under the where you put your feet at. She laid down right under there.
Y'all know how big Rogue is. You should have seen him in the puddle jumper from here to Atlanta. Me and the guy had to put our feet on top of him. All right. Any more questions?
SeekGuru.com is your friend.
Who's that?
SeekGuru.com.
That's going to be on the website. If y'all need to look it up, and it'll give you all kind of information. There'll be some good stuff.
Any other questions?
All right. Good deal. All right, Wayne.
Good evening, folks.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you, Wayne. Big old hand for Wayne. And Harley. You too. All right. Now we've got